Hi, Marriage Plot students. I'm here to talk with you a little bit about chapters 23 through 28. These are part of the big reveal. I'm very excited for you to read these chapters. And I would suggest to you that you read them before you watch this video. So if you haven't finished the reading, I'd like for you to please wait, because I don't want to give away any of the fun and exciting reveals that happen in these chapters. So this video is to talk with you about some of the important themes that you have encountered in these chapters. And my hope for you is that after you've read them, you'll go back and look at the way these themes impact the events of the chapters. So the first chapter in the set of readings you did, so you read chapters 23 through 28. In chapter 23, Jane returns from Gateshead to Thornfield Hall. And throughout this chapter, she meditates on what it has meant to her to wander through life and not really feel like she has a home. She's been sort of a wandering, homeless orphan throughout her life, first living in Gateshead, but not part of the family, and then living at Lowood School, and now living at Thornfield Hall. She recognizes that Thornfield feels the most like home, more to her than any other place that she's lived up until this point. And I want you to look at this theme of wandering and homelessness. And in particular, you might want to look at pages 219 and 221 for some specific references to wandering and homelessness. I also think there's an interesting repetition of references to Old English lore, fairies, witches, spirits. Charlotte Bronte incorporates references throughout the novel, and they serve in an interesting way to contrast with the Christian morality of the novel. It seems like they are compatible for Jane, that she is in touch both with the kind of masculine Christian notions of traditional theology and the feminine spirits of nature. She seems to embody and be able to communicate with both, which I think is unique and also not very traditional, and definitely in keeping with the romantic spirit of rebellion against tradition. So another key theme that you want to be looking at is the way that Rochester treats Jane, and the sort of the theme of self-definition versus the definitions that others impose on Jane. Rochester, when he proposes to Jane, starts to treat her very differently, and Jane really doesn't like the way he's treating her. He immediately starts to treat her in the way that he would have treated, say, a Blanche Ingram or a Celine Varens. He wants to buy her fancy clothes and fancy jewels. He even praises her beauty, and she gets really upset with him about this. She's like, "I'm not a great beauty. This isn't why you love me. Stop talking to me in this way." And she has this really strong assertion of self. Right before he proposes marriage to her, she asserts that she has a free and independent will, and that she deserves to stand equal before him. We've talked a little bit about some of the proto-feminist sentiments in this novel, and here we see Jane asserting herself in a really interesting way. I also think that the way that Rochester treats her after he proposes to her does not bode well for a marriage that would follow. He even tells her he admires her eye color and gets the color wrong. And Jane has this really funny moment where she turns to us as readers and she says, "Reader, my eyes aren't green. Like, he's wrong about this." And we feel like we are complicit with her. Like, we are kind of sharing in her experience, and she's revealing to us that Rochester isn't seeing her in the right way. Of course, the big reveal that happens in these chapters, we have the wedding itself, which is a climactic moment in the novel where Jane and Rochester go to the altar, and we even have the actual language of that Anglican marriage ceremony. And we have the priest offering up the opportunity to the congregation, saying, "If there is anyone among you who knows any reason why this couple should not be joined in marriage, you must speak now or forever hold your peace." There's this legal component to the marriage ceremony, and it's still part of the traditional Church of England marriage ceremony. As you guys know from our study of Pride and Prejudice, in the marriage tradition in the Church of England, the priest would have read the banns of marriage at least 3 times before the marriage ceremony itself to the public. And that would give the public, the community, an opportunity to speak up to speak if there was any problem in this union, if they saw any reason why these people shouldn't marry, and also to support the union, to be part of the marriage. Now, Rochester's very wealthy, and he probably bought a private ceremony enabling him to get married without the traditional reading of the banns. But we have this terrifying, terrible moment where a lawyer bursts in and says, "I declare the existence of an impediment." All of us stop and gasp along with Jane and turn around and realize that the dream of marriage with Rochester was actually a nightmare. And the nightmares that plagued her before the wedding, the nightmares of holding a child and having it slip from her hands, or the nightmare that turned into reality of the ripping of her veil, that her marriage is like that veil, it's torn in two. So Rochester turns and agrees that yes, he cannot marry Jane because in fact, he's already married. So we, like Jane, are taken away from the church and drawn up the stairs into those dark and frightening places in Thornfield Hall. And there we see the monstrous, mad wife of Edward Fairfax Rochester. Her name is Bertha Antoinetta Mason, and he refers to her as Bertha. And she looks like an animal. Her hair is disheveled. She moves like an animal, and she has preternatural strength. She's large, and she attacks people. And Jane feels terrified at the threshold of this danger. So Bertha Mason is a really interesting character, and Rochester reveals to Jane how he believes she became mad, that she was a woman who had madness in her family, but her family hid that fact from him, that she was very beautiful, but after he married her, he realized that she had also been sexually promiscuous, that she drank to excess, and so all of that had led to her madness, and that her family had concealed her madness from him in order to have her married off and taken back to England, and that he had been keeping her in the house and caring for her all of these years out of a feeling of obligation, but that this is what bound him to Thornfield Hall. Jane feels sorry for Bertha. She feels sad for her, and Rochester insists that Jane shouldn't, but I think Jane sees reflected in Bertha some of the elements and fears that she herself feels. There's a fantastic novel called Wide Sargasso Sea. It's by the novelist Jean Rhys, that imagines the whole story of Jane Eyre from the perspective of Bertha Mason and what it is that turned her into the mad woman in the attic. So this is a really climactic moment, and it's one that tells Jane that she, as much as she loves Rochester, she can't marry him. And so she fights with him. There's a wonderful sparring that goes on between Jane and Rochester verbally, where they talk about the reasons why she can't marry him. And he suggests that she should be his mistress or his wife in everything except for name only. And she refuses. She says she can't do that, that that's not a moral choice. And so once again, we have the wandering spirit of Jane, that she flees from the house and she has nothing. She has no money. She has no letter of recommendation from her former employer. She has no choices. And so she wanders in the moors. She sleeps in nature. We see the recurrence of this voice, a guiding spiritual voice that talks to Jane and tells her what she must do. And at the very end, we have her arriving at the home of St. John Rivers. So St. John is spelled St. John, but that name in England is pronounced St. John. And she's a beggar woman. Jane is reduced to penury. She's been begging for food. She's like the prodigal son in the Bible. She's begging for porridge at the back door, eating the scraps that would have been given to the pigs. So Jane, who when she was a little girl imagined what poverty must be like, is really experiencing some of the worst of poverty in Victorian England during these chapters. But fortunately, she arrives at a home that's going to take care of her and take her in and give her new experiences. So I hope you enjoyed these chapters. I hope this lecture introduced to you some of the new themes we're going to be looking at. And I want you to consider the themes of wandering and homelessness, the way that Jane defines herself versus the way others define her and look at her, the threat and the obstacle to Jane's moral growth that Rochester's initial proposals represent to her, and also the way that she compares and contrasts with the character of Bertha Mason. Happy reading. I'll see you guys soon.